the subject. Pradva.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. So I am going to ask for a quick response from all of you to this question. If you wouldn't mind, take a minute and share with us what is the one word that comes to mind when you hear elections in Africa. What you have to do in order for us to create a collective image is go to menti.com. It takes literally 20 seconds and use the code 21847894. Just enter. Each of you can enter 3 or 4 words. And if you are not able to do that, I would suggest you enter it in the chat and one of the team members will make the contribution for you. So the first question, as you think about elections in Africa, what is the one word that comes to mind? We begin to see them. Neocolonialism, manipulation, cues, stealing, dictatorship, militarism. Keep going. Let's see what else. I know you can add more than 1 or 2. And I can't see the chat screen, so I'm hoping that if there are any in the chat, one of the team members is adding them. Beginning to get a sense, a pulse, as it were, of what comes to mind for all of us. Okay, I have one more question, so I'm going to ask. Thank you. We'll hold on to this image. People are still, now they're contributing. It's coming in fast and furious. Okay, I am going to go to the next question. That's great. Give me a second. I want to go to the next one that we have here and get a similar response from you to that one also, okay? Here we go again. So just as you did for that, thank you. I see some words here. I'm going to ask again. One more question. What is the one word that comes to mind when you hear women in politics? Women in politics. What comes to mind? Beautiful. Power, inclusivity, participation, judgment. I see there are some in the chat. Strong women. patriarchy. Finally, sexual harassment, underrepresented. It's a real mix, isn't it? Voice, equality. Bravery.
Okay, thank you very much. The society problem is...
Somebody kindly mute that voice, please. Thank you. Wonderful. I'm going to give it 10 more seconds, Helen, and turn it back to you. So what we are getting is a representation of all the things that those of us convening here today think about as we think about women in politics. And I would say, let's hold on to both of these images. We can bring this up later on also. Thank you very much. I turn it back to you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Pradba. And thank you everyone for participating in the, in the icebreaker. It's interesting that we are all thinking, the same way. Now, data from the Women's Political Participation Barometer by Gender Links in 2021 indicates that 24% of women are parliamentarians in Africa. The regional data is quite revealing. East Africa seems to be performing with 32% of women in parliament, followed by Southern Africa, 8%. It's so important for us to recognize how come East Africa and Southern Africa are performing very well, and does it really mean that elections in Eastern and Southern Africa are credible? The worst performing countries are in West and Central Africa, with West Africa having 16% of women in parliament and Central Africa having 19% of women in parliament. We all know the causes of women's marginalization and exclusion in politics, to include patriarchy. And I was just smiling as I saw those words coming up: social, cultural, and religious influences. But most disturbing is the violent nature of elections in Africa and the corruption and weak election monitoring bodies that have failed to deliver credible and transparent elections. With elections coming up this year in Libya, Kenya, Angola, Somaliland, and Senegal, and Nigeria, South Sudan, DRC, Zimbabwe, Gabon, Tunisia, and Sierra Leone in 2023, it is a matter of fact that these elections are not guaranteed for women in terms of their inclusion, in terms of their participation, but also in terms of decision-making. Allow me then to welcome a fantastic list of panelists that we have who are going to be speaking with us, on this very subject matter today. So we have Professor Sherry Hendricks, Sharon Eriano, Pauline Kahubire, Ann Kutu, Quinette Tawo, and Pradba Sakarana Ryan, who are our panelists. Please welcome them, give them some flowers in the chat, or say some kind words to them. The webinar we are having today is informed by a research that was conducted by the center. But before we go to the research, let me just make some quick announcement. Please put your mics on mute and your cameras off while others are speaking. Please do a favor to us and introduce yourselves in the chat. You can also write the country where you're joining us from, just for us to know the range of people who we are discussing with this afternoon, or this morning or evening. State your name, the organization you're representing, and the country that you come from. We encourage you to send your comments to the chat. I have my colleagues who are going to be monitoring the chat, and they will send me that. You can also put your questions in there. Finally, we are going to be having very few questions at the end of some of the presentations, but at the end of everything, we have more discussions and questions. So do let me know if you have any question. Please note that we don't want you to make a presentation, just ask your questions. So thank you very much. Let me now bring Sharon, who is going to be sharing with us about this research that was conducted by the Women's International Peace Center that discusses elections. But before she does that, a bit of introduction about the Women's International Peace Center. Formerly known as ISIS Women's International Cross-Cultural Exchange, the Women's International Peace Center is a feminist organization based in Kampala, Uganda, but works regionally. The focus of the organization is to promote women's participation in peace building. And we have defined our peace building from a feminist perspective, and so it covers a range of various activities that include peace building efforts. We work in Uganda, South Sudan, DRC, and Burundi, and India. But in our advocacy work and research, we cover over 29 countries in Africa and Asia, including global advocacy. Our work over the years have seen the need for women to be very active in influencing peace building processes. And one of the things we found within our work is that mostly African countries that have gone through violence or conflict use election as a method to bring people into power. And that has always been a site of segregation, discrimination, and exclusion of women. And within this framework, we've also seen that women have remained marginalized in these processes. And not just only women, other marginalized groups, young women, women with disabilities, women, minority groups, sexual minorities have also been marginalized in these processes. So with that, we are asking ourselves, with the limited number of women who go into decision-making through political participation, do we really need elections in Africa? And if we don't, do we have alternatives? So to set us up, I'm inviting Sharon to give us a brief about this research, which was conducted by the Peace Center that was actually looking at women and political participation in the East African region. Sharon is a feminist, a young feminist, and she is the program of communications officer at the Women's International Peace Center. Actually, she was the one who worked on this research. So Sharon, could you give us highlights of the research on women's political participation in East Africa? You're welcome.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining this conversation that is going to be one of many on women's roles in elections, their political participation, and discussing the impact of electoral processes on women. Like Helen mentioned earlier on, this research or publication is called Women's World. And this particular edition that focused on women and elections in East Africa was the 52nd edition of the magazine. And through this edition, we reflected on what elections that were held in 2020 and 2021 in Burundi, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Uganda, what they meant for the women in these countries, knowing that these countries are in a post-conflict context, and we all know that elections are a critical part of peace building. So looking at these countries, Burundi, DRC, and Uganda, they are and have domesticated a number of provisions of international and regional frameworks on women's participation in electoral processes. And that includes the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Violence, all forms of discrimination against women, the CEDAW, and also the Beijing Platform for Action that sets out governments to address the barriers of women's participation in political decision-making. But however, despite having adopted these different frameworks, you find that the number of women who are participating in elections and electoral processes are still underrepresented in all the different levels of power. And that implies that the marginalization of women and their concerns and needs continues in the defining and implementation of national policies and programs. When Helen was speaking earlier on, she had mentioned that according to the Women's Political Participation Barometer, that the number of women in Africa, their percentage who are participating, women parliamentarians, is 24%. And going more into detail, according to the research and what was highlighted, you find that in DRC, the number of women who are parliamentarians is at 12.8%. That is really low. And then Uganda comes to 32.89%, and Burundi is at 38.21%. And you find that all these countries have reserved seats for women. There's a women's seat where women can go and vote on a women's ticket, or just So these numbers are not encouraging, but it also shows that there are women in these spaces, but do these spaces actually allow for their meaningful participation in these processes? You know, a lot of times we find ourselves throwing numbers here and there that we have women in political spaces, but what are they doing? Have they been given the platforms to, you know, address the political issues that are raised in the different countries? Also highlighting on some of the recurring issues or hindrances to women's political participation that appear in the publication. Some of them Helen had mentioned previously, but one are the patriarchal norms that you find that men are more endowed with power to dictate and impose their political views on women in their respective households. You find that the existing social, cultural, and religious influence that hinder women from participating in electoral processes. There's also the burden of unpaid care work, women being in charge of household duties and chores that also limits their participation in elections and political processes. The unequal access to education and lack of economic resources to be able to finance their participation in elections. You find that even just, you need a lot of money to be able to campaign. And if you're a woman at the grassroots level who maybe just has one business that is the same one that is sustaining the livelihood of your family, but then also you're trying to vie for a political position, you find that you may not have enough resources to support your candidacy for whatever position you're trying to vie for. So that is just a highlight, and based on the contributions of the writers from this edition of the Women's World on Women and Elections in East Africa, we find that politics and decision-making processes still remain male-dominated, and women are hardly visible in these spaces. And incidents where you find that women who try to take part in active politics, especially to challenge their male counterparts and assert their political rights, are ridiculed. They are referred as immoral, badly brought up, and unruly. They say a woman's place is in the home. What is she doing in a political space? What does she want to do with all this power? And yet a man is, you know, as society brings us up, saying that he's the power wielder in society. So you find that the historical patriarchal exclusion of women and girls from access to and participation on equal basis with men in public institutions and systems of governance poses the greatest challenge to gender equitable human resource development. That means that even despite the gains that that we have achieved over the years with the numbers of women increasing in parliament, women in decision making, there's still a lot that needs to be done. The numbers are increasing at a very slow pace, you know, remembering that it's already 26 years past the Beijing Declaration, and also you find it's already 21 years after UNSCR 1325. These are some of the things that continue to highlight the importance of women's participation in decision-making and political processes for their countries and the different spaces that they engage in. On that note, I would like to conclude and say that I'm looking forward to this discussion and conversation, the new ideas that will be shared, and hope that we'll definitely take on, we'll take the conversation to the next level. Thank you. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you so much for giving us a hint into what the research found in the East African region. So to set us up, you know, to get us into this conversation, I would like to Sherry Hendricks, who is going to be speaking on interrogating elections in Africa. What has been the benefit for women? Are there alternatives? Professor Hendricks is the executive director of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in South Africa. She has substantive knowledge in conflict management, conflict prevention, peacekeeping, peacemaking, women, peace and security, African politics. I don't see a better person who should be discussing this. She has published widely on these issues. She has engaged with policymakers at different levels. She's an academic, she's a researcher, and she's a civil society activist. Professor Hendricks, please welcome to give us, an analysis of the perspectives and what you see in terms of elections in Africa, and let us know if we have alternatives, if there are alternatives for us. Thank you so much for joining. Professor Hendricks.
Many thanks, Helen, and to all the organizers of the webinar. Good to be here with you. I'm not going to speak to interrogating elections in Africa specifically. I'll just give a broad framing, I think, to set the debate going. Because I think that is what Lou's asked me to do. And I think that already as organizers, I like the way in which you couch this concept in terms of a much broader discussion than simply women's inclusion into decision-making, to what transformative potential does it hold in terms of the quality of our democracies and the nature of leadership and its concomitant accountability, to look more broadly at the factors eroding democracy in the region as well. I've been asked specifically to reflect on whether or not the current nature of elections or politics allow women to be in that space of power, the obstacles facing women's political participation, and how can elections be organized differently to allow for more women's participation. I think many of the answers to this we are quite familiar with. Sharon has outlined some of them already, but I will raise some again and reflect more broadly then on what is happening around democracy in Africa and globally, more globally, and what that portends then for women's participation. Because I think that we need to be questioning our forms of participation, our forms of representation, and of governance writ large. Some basic stats that I think you already, Helen and Sharon, have spoken to, nevertheless worth repeating because it shows our struggles over the last 30 years or so. So we had Beijing Platform of Action in 1995, calling for women's political participation, and many more frameworks since then that embed this principle of gender equality and women's participation in decision-making. Here I think of the SDGs, the Maputo Protocol, Agenda 2063. For example, the SDGs commit member states to achieving full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political life by 2030, quote unquote. Yet globally, representation has only increased by 10% over the last 3 decades for women. In Africa, we have had sustained advocacy for women's representation and effective participation in politics. And indeed, I think we have made some progress, not just in terms of the frameworks and declarations, but also substantively in terms of the number of women that we were able to get into the corridors of power, and as well up the ranks, the political ranks then. Of course, still a lot needs to be done in this regard. I think in terms of representation, we're only second to Europe. And this is because many of the countries introduced fast-tracking measures, quotas and affirmative action, etc. The Women's Political Participation Africa Barometer for 2021, I think, is an excellent text, giving us all of the numbers and the reasons for why women are not included, etc. Noting, as you have said, that now women constitute 24% of the slightly more than 12,000 parliamentarians in Africa, but only 21% for local government, which is often seen as the training ground for women's political participation. It seems also that we have done well in terms of promoting women to be speakers in the House of Parliament, in both the lower and the upper house. Women's election onto management bodies, they put that at 28%, 22% for women in cabinet. But we all know the top echelons remain almost exclusively male, with only 7% as presidents or prime ministers. I think currently only in Ethiopia and Tanzania. We have some very impressive numbers and some very unimpressive numbers across the continent for women in parliament, but I think it illustrates more the unevenness of women's representation on the continent. And so we can boast numbers like in Rwanda, 61%, South Africa, 46%, but we have way too many countries with representation under 20%, Madagascar, Zambia, Comoros, etc., and still some with representation under 10%. And here it's Botswana and Eswatini and Gambia and even Nigeria. In general, as Helen mentioned, the Horn of Africa seems to have the best with 33%, and West Africa the lowest. And I think some explanation for that is also needed. The question is, what are some of the factors that militate against women's increased representation? And here again, the Women's Barometer notes the informal reasons and the formal reasons. And these are ones well known to us around culture, tradition, socialization, finance and resources, violence against women, electoral systems, and management. And we all know that patriarchy remains the dominant culture globally. And particularly so for rural areas. And that's also partly explains the numbers in Africa, that our gender division of labor remains intact. Women still have the burden of household chores, and gender identity remains associated with the domestic realm, and that this hinders women's entry into politics. Child marriage is still practiced on the continent, inequitable access to higher education, perceptions of men as born leaders still very much prevail. The space of politics as a male preserve still very much out there, male gatekeeping, and now even male pushback is still out there. Political intimidation is rife. I think when the stakes are high for political parties, that is particularly when we see women's representation decline. All of these factors, I think, should be noted. We also note, and I think more importantly for us, the lack of access to economic resources, because we all know it is very expensive to run these political campaigns. And women, we also do not support each other enough because there is a gap between women leaders and women followers. Political parties themselves remain deeply patriarchal, and we are asking them to lead on transforming our societies. Women only constitute 12% of political party leadership across the 54 countries in Africa. So it's also one thing for women to get into the political structures, quite another for them to actually stay there and move up, because the kind of support structures that we need there are also not in place. We have to look at the opportunity structures, and this has been done particularly by our UN organizations. When are women most likely to get representation? And we know that quotas is the best way to achieve that. So I think that the literature and practice on women and election is extensive, and the reasons for why they have not been included are quite well articulated already. However, we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. What is it we are striving to get into? And once we are in there, how will we succeed to bring about the transformation of our societies? Because it is clear that mere representation alone does not lead to a reduction in gender-based violence, to reducing the economic inequalities, or to changing the cultures of gender domination at home or in the workplace. to more equitable societies. And South Africa is a very good example of that. There has of late been a questioning of our forms of democracy and our forms of representation and participation. And as women, we also need to be alive to this kind of introspection. The multi-party democracies we have created have not delivered on the peace dividend that was spoken about in the 1990s, on reducing inequalities, on better service delivery, on greater transparency and accountability, on more choice. Many are saying now that the last 30 years have been, quote unquote, a false dawn, that we now are seeing a rise in authoritarian governments, a rise in coups in the region, pseudo-democratic transitions as in Sudan and Zimbabwe and Algeria, an erosion of term limits, the credibility of elections themselves have been questioned, the election results disputed, leading to more conflict, and more people willing to settle for supposed benevolent dictators. And the COVID pandemic has exacerbated this, I think. So overall, there's been a decline in the quality of our democracies and a question on whether or not in its current form it can provide the public goods that we are after. So the discussion there is not merely about elections, but more broadly about our systems of government and the social contracts we need to be re-entering into with them. Our systems and structures of governance are beginning to face deep legitimacy crisis on the continent. I don't think our response should be an automatic attempt to want to further entrench current systems or to include ourselves more and more into these systems. It won't suffice any longer. Women have a right to be represented, hard fought for, hard won, and to often jettisoned for more instrumentalist arguments about what it is we can do when we are also in power, but really not borne out in practice. So 55 presidents, whether women or men, will find it extremely difficult in the future to rule 3.8 billion people, predominantly youth, with way more fluid gender identities. Political parties who rule millions of people, but who have a membership of a fraction of that size and who get to power via elections in which half the population of voting age are no longer, of voting age don't even see the need to vote any longer. These political parties, I think, will certainly need to either reinvent or restructure themselves or fade away in years to come. And we need to be thinking, and I think others can spend more time reflecting on this, on the digital age and what that then portends for representation. So we as women therefore need a deeper reflection on how we can change our systems of government and develop new social contracts with gender equality at its very foundation, how to transform our state-society relations. What kind of states do we want? How do we want to redistribute the resources in it? How do we want to participate in governance? Certainly not just by throwing a paper in a plastic or cardboard box every 4 or 5 years. How can we make choice more direct, more participatory, and deliver more meaningful results? We also need to be sensitive to the divisions between women, who represents whom, and to the different genders that are present and how we are as inclusive as possible, and not only talking about women as if we are homogeneous categories, all with the same interests and beliefs, etc. So by way of concluding then, if we go on the path we have been going down now to get women's representation, we will not reach the 50% mark for women by 2030 or by 2063. And we will not achieve the substantive gains for why we want to be included. That is for gender equal policies, to challenge discriminatory laws, for social justice, gender justice, etc., to increase our economic opportunities. We certainly want democratization, if by that we mean that people participate in and formulate their policies, their laws, etc., and have a say in who will implement them, not who will lead them, but who will deliver those services on their behalf. Where power is vested in people and not in leaders, where public goods are distributed in the interest of the population as a whole. Where I ever want to go back to, we have to go back to the drawing board to see if the ways in which we have designed our structure, systems, and processes to achieve this are still appropriate for current contexts, and what other ways we can then use to have more meaningful participation, and not simply clamor to be included into these, but really be at the forefront of designing these new processes from the onset. That would be transformative. Let me then just say that having said all of this, I don't want to sound as if I am not for women's participation in elections. I think that this is a right that we no longer should be fighting about in the ways that we have done, and that it's time to change our governance systems and not just elections within them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Cheryl. Leave us songs. You know, do we want to reinvent? Do we want to restructure? Do we want to allow the current governance system to fade off? And you know, how do we transform state relations? You know, what type of state do we want as women? What exactly are we questioning, you know, in this webinar? Not just about election management, but about the entire governance system and women's participation within it. If we're saying that this is the time to change, we're looking for more transformative leadership, you know, but how are we going to do this? So thank you so much. I would like now to invite Queenette Tawo. My sister, Queenette, is the Women, Peace and Security Lead at the West African Network for Peace Building based in Accra, Ghana. Queenette leads the application of formative network frameworks relating to women, peace and security in the region. And she coordinates the WPS program activities at the regional offices of WANEP across 15 WANEP national networks in the region. Queenette, do you want to give us, you know, some of your perspectives, what women's political participation means for democracy, and if women's participation is shifting the definition of power? Professor Cheryl already asked that question. You know, women in leadership, are they shifting power? And you know, what form of leadership is it? Are they calling for accountability? And is women's leadership transforming systems, you know, challenging structures? And is there any value that we have in women's political participation? Queenette, you're welcome to speak.
Okay, thank you, Helen. It's good reconnecting once again. But well, hello everyone, and thank you all for joining. But I want to say that I have to off my video because it's actually interfering with my connection. And please, if at any point I'm off, I will quickly reconnect and rejoin. I'm just praying that I will have my connectivity will be steady so I'll have to off the video. So thank you very much, Helen. And this is a very interesting conversation, and I am really very happy and honored and actually privileged to also be part of it. It is one of the conversations that is very dear to my heart, you know, being a woman activist myself, a gender activist and all that. And I've also been always ruminating in my mind about women's leadership. Whenever we talk about women's leadership, are women really taking leadership, or are we just, is this a punchline that we keep on talking about women leadership? Because we have been talking about women leadership for as long as I can remember. And I don't know whether we're making headway. Of course, in some aspects we are making headway, but we are talking about political participation, women and political participation. It is a topic I know that we can never exhaust. So it is good that we're starting the conversation, and we'll continue to have this conversation, even as we bring in different perspectives. I want to thank Cheryl for bringing in all these perspectives and also quoting some of the things that I also have that I want to refer to. So for me not to sound repetitive and boring, when it comes to those aspects where Cheryl has spoken extensively about, I will just gloss over it and talk about it. I started you know, my perspective by actually bringing to my mind that when we talk about politics, what do we really mean by politics? And of course, politics, as they say, is a set of activities that are associated with making decisions. Making decision is a form of leadership, decision making is a component of leadership. In groups or other forms of power relations, we keep on talking about women and unequal power relations. So it is good that politics is one of those things that show how we can make decisions in groups and among individuals. It is also border on distribution of resources or status. And then it also brings to my mind, what do we mean by authority? Because for you to make a decision, or to be part of decision making, you must have some form of authority. So authority is the legitimate power of a person or group over other people. And of course, it can be used interchangeably between power. So authority and power can be used interchangeably. And then of course, the big elephant in the room, leadership. Leadership encompasses the ability of an individual, group, organization to lead, influence, or guide other individuals, teams, or organizations. So are women leading? Are women influencing? Are women guiding other individuals and teams? Are women actually playing this leadership role in wherever they find themselves, especially in political dispensation? Now, before I delve into the whys and the whether, the ifs and why nots, I want to say that women have actually made great strides over the years in many sectors, and of course in the political sphere. We have known that women have held political positions. They have been prime ministers, they have been presidents. In West Africa, we've had our women presidents. They have been deputy governors, they have been ministers, parliamentarians. So we have had a lot of women. And of course, the first barometer 2021 that has been quoted already says that women are still far from achieving their equal and effective participation in political decision making. That is in leadership position. And then the Interparliamentary Union report says that women representation in parliament, although it has increased since the Beijing conference from 15% to 30%, 25%, but there's a caveat here. It says that at this rate, it will take us 50 years until 2070 to achieve gender parity. That is very scary for me. It is really very scary because it means that women leadership as it stands today is a tip of
So I guess we can give some minutes to Queenette to come back. She already told us her internet was a bit challenging. So maybe as we do that, I can already begin to pose some questions that had already come up for Cheryl to begin to think about it. So a question came to ask, so what are the alternatives we have if we are questioning elections and the systems and the structures? Do they exist? Is it possible to have any form of alternative to picking leaders in Africa? That was the first question. And someone also asked, what can we do to make elections more credible in Africa, based on the information that majority of them are not transparent, they do not provide the adequate framework and environment for transparent elections to take place. So while we're waiting for Queenette, maybe Cheryl could actually address the first question. Cheryl, back to you.
Thank you. I don't think there are easy answers here. We never always had the systems of governance that we have globally, that is not just here in Africa. In Africa, it's very recent, the form of elections that we have. I think that all societies go through change, and they need to at some point reflect on their systems of governance as societies to say, how do we want to be governed now? How do we want to be represented? And I think we are at that moment globally, not just in Africa, but globally, where we do have to begin to have that conversation with ourselves. I mean, we can certainly think of ways in which we can increase the number of women in elections, in which we can make elections more credible, improve our election management boards, improve our processes for elections, etc., our dispute resolution mechanisms for elections. But that would be largely tinkering with what we already have. Elections are about choice, about who we choose to lead us. I don't think we're going to do away with elections. They will just take different forms than what we currently have. 5 years going to put a ballot in a box. It's that. So it's not that elections are going to be done away with. It's how we make those choices, who we decide to elect, into what kinds of structures to do what for us. That's the conversation that needs to be had.
Thank you very much. I see Elizabeth Kamigisha's up. Elizabeth, could you unmute and ask your question? Thank you. Elizabeth, you have the floor. You're still muted. Sharon, could you let her unmute? She's still muted though. Okay, while she's trying to unmute, we also have an interesting question in the chat. It says, women representation has not delivered the social and political dividend for women in Uganda. Once in parliament or other leadership positions, they tend to follow their political party lines or of those who would have financed them. How can we ensure that our women politicians are able to effectively represent the interest of women or issues pertinent to women? This question is coming from Mary Oduka Ochan, who is one of the eminent women of the Women's Situation Room. Elizabeth, we are still waiting for you to speak. Your hands are still up. Could you unmute? Sherry, do you want to reflect on the question that I just read coming from the chat?
Just to answer Prabha quickly, the third part, it's who will elect into what structures, through which processes. So yes, I mean, this has been an age-old question that we elect women and they don't really they get into political parties, they get into government positions, and they do not really promote women's interests because they have to follow party lines. I mean, we all know that political parties themselves are dominated by males and male perspectives. One is to form women's political parties. That's one way of doing it. The other would be, and more appropriate given this time, is how do we change, if we only have these political parties structures to work with, how do we change political party structures themselves so that they are more reflective of the interests of both men and women and gender non-conforming persons. And that, I think, is going to be the way in which we change it. Because if we are hoping that the more women we get into political parties, that they will then just push a particular line that does not conform to the party line, it's not going to happen. A critical mass is what is needed, one, but then also to change that political party ideology, structure, modes of engagement, etc.
Okay, thank you very much, we will now move over to the next presentation. As we are all discussing this, talking about the marginalization of women, we also didn't want to take for granted the fact that we don't want to box young women into the general definition of women. So right now, I would like to invite Pauline Kahubire. She's going to be speaking on young women and elections in Africa. We want to have a conversation on what does it mean, for young women in terms of how elections are conducted in Africa. Is there any hope, they see that women's decision-making could be improved through political participation? Pauline is a feminist. She's an embodying activist who uses online media to demand that the rights of all women and girls are recognized and respected. She is the communications officer at the Women's Situation Room, Uganda. The Women's Situation Room is an early warning and early response mechanism that promotes peaceful elections in Africa. Pauline, you're welcome to speak.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone. Gwyneth and Professor Cheryl have alluded to some of the issues that affect young women, and I'm mostly going to focus on what they left out because our issues as women are intersecting. So in recent years, the number of young women participating in elections and in the broader political sphere has increased across the continent. But like Sharon mentioned earlier, progress has been slow. And this is because our participation as young women in leadership and decision-making is doubly crippled by the fact that we are women and also by our age as young people. So you find that in most times we have to work twice. We have to do twice the work for half the results, even in 2022. You'll find that young women in Africa are still marginalized, specifically in their participation in electoral processes. And yet this participation in elections is an underrated but crucial entry point for us as young women to participate in other aspects of decision-making and systems. It was mentioned that the electoral platform in Africa is still largely dominated by men. Candidates and the dominant voices in the media are mostly men. Patriarchy favors the male candidate. And in most cases, labels that are anti-woman are widely used, and to a certain extent, these have been normalized. Despite this, we've had opportunities to play various roles and different stages of the electoral cycle in a number of countries. Young women have been voters, candidates, election observers, election officials, and talking about democracy, we have also seen young women take part in remarkable political mobilization by participating in demonstrations and protests against corruption and inequality. This was, for example, in Sudan, where the face of the Sudan revolution in 2019 was Ala Salah, who is a young woman, and she should be turning 26 this year. We've also seen the same in Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. In terms of elections specifically, the rate at which young women participate on election day itself is different from their participation in pre-election activities like campaign rallies. And the same goes for other civic engagements, such as attending community meetings and joining others in raising issues and contacting political and community leaders. For Uganda, during the 2021 elections, it was actually encouraging to see that many women candidates in the election were young, which indicated an emerging interest of young women in political careers. And regardless of what they thought the outcome of the election would be, young women also turned up in large numbers to vote, which indicates that young women in Africa are hungry for governments that will solve their everyday problems. And during election seasons, we've also seen young women use digital platforms to express their views on national issues and to demand change. And in this way, they have worked around the hierarchies of political engagement and made engagement possible in settings where it would otherwise not be physically possible. For example, young people in South Africa led the I Voted campaign on social media, which was instrumental in encouraging youth to turn up and vote. And then in the Gambia, during the 2016 pre-election season, Gambia Decides was used as a hashtag to propel new political leadership into office after the 22-year rule of former President Yahya Jammeh. And in the following year, in 2017, they changed the hashtag to Gambia Has Decided, which forced Jammeh to abandon his attempt to overturn the election outcome. I think we are also all familiar with the End SARS movement in Nigeria, where civil society activists and young people forced the Nigerian government to disband the SARS police unit accused of human rights abuses, where citizens were harassed, robbed, and tortured. And still in Nigeria, they also ran a profound campaign dubbed the Not Too Young to Run campaign, which addressed the issue of legislative exclusion of youth in election contests for president, the House of Representatives, and the State House of Assembly. And the main result of this campaign was the fact that Parliament passed the Not Too Young to Run Act, which reduced the age barrier for youth to run and hold elective office. However, some young women have abstained from participating in elections entirely because they regard the exercise as futile. And that is to say that the process does not respond or is not seen to take into account their immediate concerns like unemployment and poverty. And several factors are normally cited for this, including disappointment with politicians who fail to deliver their campaign promises. And questions also remain about the quality of this participation, as some young women continue to be disenfranchised in electoral processes. In most cases, some think that their messages are devalued or ignored, resulting in their frustration, which should not be the way things are done, considering that Africa's population is more than 65% of Africa's population right now is below 24 years, which makes us the youngest continent on the world. And because of this exclusion, some have resorted to negative participation. So a number of young women have been observed to participate in electoral processes through violent means, and these are mostly recruited by political leaders. And this type of youth exploitation and manipulation has become a common feature of African politics, especially where there are high unemployment levels. For example, in Ghana, youth vigilante groups are common, where political parties recruit young men and women to carry out violence and disrupt polling processes and engage in violence even after elections. This is also true of Nigeria's Boko Haram, which has been reported to recruit women as militants and suicide bombers, either by force or by will. In terms of the environment being conducive for young women's participation, there are some factors that have made this possible. For example, the need to increase women's political participation and inclusion is rooted in numerous international and regional and national frameworks. So, for example, CEDAW, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. I don't know, Helen, it's my time, huh?
Yeah, almost.
Okay, let me conclude. Yeah, so the frameworks that make it possible for young women to participate, especially to highlight the African Youth Charter, which talks about the role of young women in participation. However, some factors that prevent our participation include the violent nature of elections, which forces young women to opt out of politics. Earlier speakers talked about the patriarchal nature and the political party structures that are not convenient for young women to participate. And then there's also the issue of poverty, income inequality, and unemployment, which prevent young women from participating, considering that most of them have not really established themselves financially, yet some of the requirements to participate in these processes are expensive. There's also issues of poor civic education coupled with low levels of literacy, which contribute to low levels of young women's participation. A study was carried out in Uganda where young men said they were interested in discussing politics more than young women at a rate of 74% to 48%. A key issue that I think needs to be discussed is the fact that youth participation is also negatively impacted by legislative inclusions, such as age limits. So for example, the voting age in Cameroon is 20 years, and yet I think about 40% of the population is above 18, but below 20, which makes it reasonable for them to participate in the country's politics. Yes. In terms of conclusion, I think that democracy is built from within. The sheer number of youths compared to adults on the continent befits our political and electoral inclusion. Therefore, young women should be able to participate not only as voters, but as contestants and electoral officials. Young women's movements should be strengthened to build alliances and challenge oppressive norms and power structures, thus contributing to increased representation in leadership spaces and political spaces. They'll need capacity building to understand the nexus between elections and democracy, and also advocacy and lobbying skills for their engagement with various electoral stakeholders. And then political parties can do more by making their leadership structures fair and inclusive. For example, nomination forms should not be the same amount for all people contesting for a particular position, and should take into account the different backgrounds. Youth also ought to have adequate access to credible information, which gives them voice and participation. So we talked about the use of technology, but not everyone has access to this technology, especially with the rural-urban divide and even the digital gender divide. And fulfilling electoral promises across the continent, especially those that relate to citizens' rights to basic services, will also go a long way in improving the quality and quantity of young women's political participation. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pauline. It's very interesting to get this insight from a young woman, but also sharing with us the different experiences in the different African countries in terms of young women, youth participation, not just in elections, but also in other arenas of decision making, in terms of their advocacy for improved governance. You know, the issues that Cheryl talked about, social contract, and what kind of transformative change do we expect from our political leaders. I'm going to take Queenette so that she can finish her presentation. But before Queenette comes, Pauline, I would like you to think about these two questions. How do we accompany women leaders once they are elected and build their capacities to serve the public and ensure that they are not the only ones above, but also mentor young people? There's that issue of lack of mentorship. So how can we accompany these women who are already in leadership, not just to deliver, but also to mentor young people? The second question is, but do you mean that old women do not have ability to lead in politics? I think it's just a reflective question. So think about them and then we can talk about them. Queenette, sorry about the internet. Could you please finish your presentation? Queenette.
Okay, I'm really very sorry. I had to even change my router, and I do pray and hope that this will work. Anyway, my question was whether the women leadership is yielding dividends. How do I see women leadership? But before I go that deep into that, I was trying to establish a context before I go there. So first of all, I had talked about what leadership entails and what it means. Since we are talking about women participation in politics, I also wanted to make the argument of why women should be involved in politics at all. It is a fundamental human right. We know that it is recognized by the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And of course, we know that for purposes of equity and fair representation, all interest groups in the society should be part and parcel of the principles of democracy. We know that women participation is key to achieving the global gender equality and democratic balance. Previous presenters have alluded to the fact of how we can achieve gender parity and how we are not even getting gender parity in the political dispensation. It has always been said that women make up 50% of the world's population, and you can imagine keeping that 50% away from political democratic governance and from leadership and decision making. That would be very, very catastrophic. Now, in terms of women leadership yielding dividends, it has been established that countries where women are well represented seem to have more pro-women policies. We always, lend credence to the Nordic countries of Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, where they have the highest levels of women's representation in Europe. And they also have most gender responsive policies that address female roles. Now, in West Africa, for instance, we have had a female president, Her Excellency Ellen Sirleaf Johnson. And for me to go into the debate or the argument whether her tenure as the president was better than the tenure of all the other male presidents put together, it depends on which side of the divide you are in. And it also, has to go through a lot of scientific research and all that. But the fact that we know, and research has told us, that when women are brought into the equation, it tends to make things a bit better. Why? Because women have been recognized, as people that have accountability. They have been recognized as people that, that can go all out. They have untapped capacity and talents. Let us not forget that women have been making it very well in informal sectors. Women are leaders in the homes, we know. Women are leaders in every informal sectors, and very soon I'm going to establish, women leadership even in pre-colonial times in West Africa. So we know that as for that leadership quality, women have it, but it is more at the informal level. But when we now come to the formal level, how do we harness women's leadership potentials for it to yield dividends? So like I said, I want to quickly go back. I don't want to belabor you with the legal protocols and the normative frameworks that support women participation in politics, which has already been alluded to. So I'll go quickly to say that in pre-colonial West Africa, there was actually a history of gender parity where women had authority over men. During pre-colonial times, West African women played very significant roles in their societies. They played key roles in religious, political, social, and economic processes. They had authority, they had power, they had the right to give orders and make decisions. Their position was actually complementary and not subordinate to that of the men. And so we can safely say that in pre-colonial West Africa, political power and authority was actually divided between men and women so that each gender had the ability to manage and control their own affairs. And I would like to give you a very, very few examples, not belaboring the issue, that for instance, in Ghana, the Asante land of Ghana, we had the queen mothers. We still have queen mothers today, but their traditional authority emanated right from pre-colonial times. They were the co-rulers of the Asante land. They derived their power from the matrilineal nature. They determined succession. They determined inheritance, rights, obligations. They were the ones that were guiding the king in all matters of state, tradition, and religion. and they were the ones that only have the right to criticize and rebuke the king in public. In Nigeria, for instance, we have the Yalode in Yoruba land. These were chiefs in their own rights. They are representatives of women with proven ability as a leader, so they had leadership qualities. The Yalodes control the vast economic resources and exercise legislative, judicial, and executive powers with their male counterparts. Finally, I just want to mention briefly the Igbo Women's Assembly that we call the Otumuada or Otuinyom. They constituted the assembly that discussed issues that affected women in the community. They serve as political pressure groups. They were pressure groups. That means that they had leadership qualities. They were leading in their groups. They had the authority to pronounce punishments in cases where husbands mistreated their wives. And so you want to ask the question, if women had all these powers in pre-colonial era, what then happened? How did women lose their power and authority? Historians have alluded to the fact that colonialism should also be fingered as one of the factors that actually marked the beginning of the end of equality between male and females in politics and in other aspects. Because the colonial environment did not allow for all this group solidarity. It didn't allow for two mothers to exist and to carry out their actions, which of course they were termed primitive. Then of course the advent of Western education. We know that girls, when the missionaries came with their brand of education, girls had less access than boys to missionary education. And this is affecting women up till today because there is still inequality in education between male and females. Now, there were also other official and unofficial factors, which I don't want to belabor because it has been alluded to, things like the customs and tradition, religious practices, roles, and also the conception of politics. You know, politics is always seen as a man's game. It is seen as a game of violence. And because women, by their delicate nature, according to gender, that, allude to women, weaker sex, and say men are, the stronger sex. And we know that, of course, the gender is a social construct. So women tend to, shy away from politics because of the violence attributed to that. And we know, of course, that the lack of resources is also a factor, is a barrier for women to develop their leadership potentials in political governance. And then, of course, the lack of the rules of the game. Because politics has a rule, and that rule of the game must be obeyed. Men, for instance, rely on their old boy syndrome in Nigeria, that's what we call it, or the classmate syndrome, or the group syndrome, where they turn their social groupings into political entities. Women have not been able to do that. That works for men. And of course, there's also the male dominance of top leadership in parliament. While this was going on, somebody had said that, why is it that the women in parliament are not making enough influence? We do know that women, to make influence, to make significant influence, they need to have a critical mass of women. It is the question of majority versus the minority, where the majority always have, an upper hand. And then there are these many forms and guises of violence against women in politics, which is a major deterrent. For instance, the way women are portrayed in the media, all these issues about fake news, all these issues about judging female politicians according to, their dressing, according to their marital status, which is not the same standards that are being used on the men. So there's very special standards that they are using to associate women in politics and to men. The media is not helping matters. When women are contesting for elective offices, they leave the essence of the conversation to talk about her personal life. The men are not going through this. And so all this dampens the women leadership potentials. So when we want to talk about whether women leadership potentials are yielding dividends, we want to say that yes, at the informal level, they are making appreciable progress. They are making significant progress, but it needs to be translated into the formal level. It is at the formal level that we want to see this leadership change. We want to see this shift in how women leadership is yielding dividends. but because of a lot of barriers against them. Let us not forget that women came into the formal leadership late, when men have already taken over the positions. And now, that is why they keep on thinking that propping women up looks like a tug of war, that women want to fight the men, want to push them out of the way. No.
So can you round up, Queen A?
Yeah.
Please, can you round up?
Okay. So just as a form of rounding up, I want to say that there is appreciable growth of women in politics because there have been mechanisms in place to increase women participation. For instance, we have the equal participation law in Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, allowing more women to participate and contest for elective offices. And this significantly boosted their participation in 2022 elections. Mali adopted a 30% quota for women in elective office. Their law number 052. Political parties now have the obligation to respect this quota when putting forward their candidates. Benin, although has no affirmative action provision for women, but they have a good number of women in the National Assembly. It is 8%, but it is a step in the right direction. Senegal has a quota system for both the lower house of assembly and at the national level. And this means that a significant number of women can now contest elections. In 2001, they had 19.2%, but in 2017, it increased to 43%. So that is a step in the right direction. So how will we then ensure that women leadership gain traction? It is for us to build women's skills. We cannot overemphasize this. Women need to have the same armor, the same ammunition to be able to, work, to be able to be at par at the same level with the men. So it has always been said that for a woman to make significant impact, the woman has to do double the things that a man does, because she will be, they are going to measure her against so many other factors that they are not measuring the man. So we need this capacity. We need women to also play the men at their own game. Let us translate our social groups, our women groups, let us translate them into what? A political group. In those days,
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you because the time is running. I'm really sorry. Apologies. I know you're passionate about this issue, and if I give you 2 hours, I know you will not stop talking. So my apologies. I have to stop you. Thank you so much, Queen. For those reflections. Please type in more points in the chat. I think a lot of people are following. You gave us the historical perspective of women's participation in the West African region, and you're actually giving us examples of some of the approaches, that have been used in countries like Mali, in Senegal, so thank you so much. Maybe some of the things you've not said, you've already responded to some of the questions. You can also mention them, when we are doing our closing. So thank you so much. There's an interesting question I would like you to look at by the time I call you back to respond, coming from Liberia. Someone in the chat said Liberia has been proposing an affirmative action of 30% for women, but this has not been able to happen. What can we do? What advice would you have in terms of strengthening the potential of women in political participation in Liberia? So some of those strategies, please hold on, you're going to share them later. And then the other question is coming from Burundi. Our sister from Burundi is saying, most of these women are there, yes, but there's a shortcoming that they are also not supporting the women's agenda. They seem to support the political party agendas. What can we do? How can we support and mentor, women in the Burundi is to be able to participate So Olga's hand, your comment, just ask a question. Okay, she's not unmuting. So I'm going to go to the next.
I'm unmuting. I could hardly hear you, Helen. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, please ask your question. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry, I could have typed, but I cannot see the whiteboard very clearly because of my eyesight. Yeah. But the previous speakers, I've liked the proposals and the experiences being shared. But I'm a bit worried as women who are involved in encouraging each other to participate and engage in the platforms for higher positions of influence within our countries, within various sectors. We forget to always address something that is silently eating us as women. We all are aware of women who actually express their interests, give us their proposals on being electoral candidates. But how many of us as women really genuinely support them? And this is something we suffer on the grounds. Whenever I go in the grassroots and ask who was like for example, when I went to my mother's area, I asked who was the female candidate. And I'm asking fellow women and they said, the other lady. And I'm like, why aren't you supporting her? And it's based on rumors, their attitudes towards her. So as women, we also are our own enemies. And I don't know if this research captures such things. I would like us to have experiences across the country, across the continent. How are women supporting fellow women? Sometimes we base this a lot on our attitudes, on our views of the candidate. I think we also need to start equipping women to become proponents for fellow women. That is what I would like to see if this has come out in our researches and the experience across the board. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Olga. Apologies, I didn't know you were not hearing me. Thanks so much. Could you introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, I'm Olga Gerwa. I am an academic. I'm currently with Uganda Christian University, but I've been an activist for many years since I joined the Council for Women Economic Empowerment of Women in Africa. That is when I was introduced to gender. And issues about women in politics, women in leadership, and actually women economic empowerment are central to my heart. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Olga. So while the presenters are reviewing the questions, I want us to quickly move to the next one. We're going to be looking at, despite everything Olga has just talked about, Pauline talked about, Queenette has also mentioned them. It came out when Professor Sherry was talking. What hopes for peaceful elections in Africa? Do we have any hopes in it at all? So we have the Anne Kuntu to share the experience of the Women's Situation Room in Uganda. Anne is an eminent woman of the Women's Situation Room. Anne, I'm giving you approximately, if you can please stop after 8-9 minutes so that we can have more time for exchanges.
Okay.
Anne.
Thank you, Helen. Allow me to switch off my video. The network is not very stable, so I'm going to switch off my video and I'll just speak. Thank you. So just before I begin my presentation, I came across a quote this afternoon that I found very exciting. Because it captured the spirit within which the Women's Situation Room is operating. And that is a quote that I take directly from Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. And it was a comment I think he made at a meeting that's happening today on financing for peace building. So the quote goes, "When we consider the costs of war to the global economy, as well as the cost to humanity's very soul, then peace building is a bargain and a prerequisite for development and a better future for all." End of quote. And that was by Antonio Guterres. What he spoke about is why we do what we do. That peace building is a lot more cheaper than war. But coming to the question, and allow me to speak just a little bit about the Women's Situation Room within this very limited time. The Women's Situation Room is a nonpartisan and women-led African mechanism that promotes peaceful and violence-free electoral processes. And it is in line with the UN SCR 1325. That is the basis from which we draw our mandate. Our rallying call is "Peace is in your hands," and the Women's Situation Room provides a non-partisan and an impartial platform for women and youth to mitigate election-related conflict, to de-escalate tensions, and to facilitate real-time response to violent incidents. Now, the Women's Situation Room was initiated by the Angie Brooks International Center in Liberia in 2011, and it has since been replicated in 7 other countries in Africa. The AU Agenda is my Agenda campaign cited it as one of the best practices in mitigating electoral violence. And so it's been replicated in 7 countries, including in Uganda. In Uganda, it's been implemented twice, first in 2016, and now more recently in 2021. So how does it work, and what has it been able to achieve? The Women's Situation Room uses 3 tools to enable or to support the prevention or the promotion of peaceful elections. And it works before, during, and after elections. The 3 tools that we use before, during, and after elections include peace education. And in the last election, the Women's Situation Room deployed 4,500 peace advocates and peace monitors in 30 districts across Uganda. And their main role was to educate the communities on non-violent approaches to resolving conflicts. So it was essentially to educate people that, look, violence is not the answer, and whereas we may not do away with conflicts, certainly it is cheaper to manage them in a more non-violent approach. In addition to that, to the peace education, we also have the early warning mechanism. And in those districts where we deploy peace monitors and peace advocates, who are both men and youth and women, the idea is for them to be able to alert us on potential triggers of violence, because some of these areas are actually flashpoints and areas, with latent conflict that, at any time things will flare up. So the idea of having the peace monitors in these areas was for them to be able to alert us and other institutions that this could potentially lead to violence, and then, a timely response is done to prevent violence before it breaks out. As I said, we work with both women. This is a women-led mechanism, but we work very closely with the youth. And the reason we do that is that we feel that it is more important to engage young people in peace building rather than to treat them as a threat to be managed. Because they too have their own ideas, they have their own grievances, but they also have agency. And we want to build onto that agency to promote peace and ensure that, peace building is an inclusive process. During the elections, we have what we call a rapid response mechanism. And in the rapid response mechanism, we have physical rooms, and I guess that's where the situation room idea comes from. We have a physical room in which we have a call center. And that call center, we have toll-free lines that we have shared across the country, which people can use to call and report any incidences of violence or any incidences that could lead to violence. Within our situation room or the physical room, we also have some of the key stakeholders, and these include members of the security forces, including the police, as well as the army, who are often mandated to keep law and order during the elections. But we also have a very important stakeholder, and that is the Electoral Commission. From our findings is that many of the issues that lead to conflict, particularly, or electoral violence, particularly on election day, are not always the big things, but small things like, you know, the delayed delivery of electoral materials, issues like names missing on registers, maybe people not carrying the required identification. In the last election in Uganda, it was things like biometric machines not working, and all those cause a lot of agitation at poll centers and could ultimately lead into some sort of, you know, fights and things like that, and you know, rumors going on. Sometimes some of these are very quote unquote innocent oversights, but in an election environment, oftentimes people may interpret them to mean something else, something more sinister. And so the rapid response mechanism enabled people to call in and say, hey, this is happening here. Names are not on register. We are not being allowed to vote. And because we have these stakeholders in the room, they're then able to respond to some of these grievances in real time. And we, from our statistics, we received over 2,000 calls on election day in Uganda. And close to 1,700 of the calls and, you know, the grievances were addressed within a short time, and most of them to the satisfaction of the people who had called. In addition to these tools, we also have a very important tool, and that is one of stakeholder engagement. We engage multiple stakeholders, and particularly those who are involved in the election. I've talked about the security agencies, I've talked about the Electoral Commission, but we also engage all the political actors, and that is all the political parties that are involved in the election. And we start this engagement before the election, still advocating for peaceful elections, but we also carry it on after the elections. Because from our findings, many of the issues that trigger conflict or that trigger electoral violence are issues that have been around for a long time and may not be resolved in the short time. However, through this engagement, we are trying to alert the key stakeholders on the issues at stake, saying that, look, if we do not address, for example, structural inequalities, if we do not address youth unemployment, we'll continuously have, you know, outbursts of, you know, conflict and all that now, you know, in between the period between elections, but most of all during elections when people have an opportunity to air their grievances. And so we've been engaging these stakeholders. We have developed a long-term strategy in which we are engaging these stakeholders and with them coming up with strategies that what are some of the ways that we can address these underlying causes of conflict in our country. It is not something that we can do alone as the Women's Situation Room because we are not an implementing agency. However, what we are doing is starting off this dialogue and then linking up the various actors and supporting them whichever way we can to begin to find potential solutions to these problems. In these engagements, we have also brought up some of the shortcomings that were observed during the election. For example, the level of mistrust is a very high level of mistrust between the various political actors, as well as those who are responsible for managing the elections. And this mistrust goes on even into the public. There is a total lack of confidence in the electoral processes. And so in our engagement with these actors, the question has been how, you know, first of all, alert them to what the challenge is. And then together begin to see how can that actor, how can that specific actor begin to find ways of addressing the public's grievances against it. Because mistrust and the lack of communication are a big factor. they're a big, big cause of conflict and violence. And so if it comes to communication, how, for example, can we have timely communication so that the public is informed of whatever is happening in a timely and an effective manner that, you know, removes all doubt and mistrust and things of the sort? So this is how we've been working. As I said, the Women's Situation Room works before, during, and after. And so right now we are in the phase of after, and we're looking at some of these long-term issues. And although I cannot say right now, you know, that we've achieved A, B, C, D, certainly the talks that we're having are promising, and we hope that perhaps we will see a slightly different election. I see Helen is looking at me, and so it's time for me to bring this to an end. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Anne. Yes, I was really looking at you. I didn't want you to stop because I was also enjoying the presentation. Thank you so much. There are some questions that are coming up here, and I want you to begin to think of it as we take the last presentation. Do we need alternatives to elections in Africa? Or should we remain with the elections? The other question is, do we need political parties? Can women not think of other forms of organizing? So I want you to also think about that, even as you talk about. Thank you so much. The organization's mission is to build local skills for peace and promote. Yeah, and give us your reflections in terms of, you know, democracy and the connection to marginalization, decline democracy.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me, Helen? It is, of course, at this moment, after an hour and 45 minutes that my internet decides to fail me.
Oh, no, I can hear you.
Oh, good. So I will keep my camera off. I've been absolutely riveted by the points that have been made, starting with Cheryl at the beginning, to Gwyneth and to Pauline. And so I want to take us back about 30,000 feet above the amazing details of the Situation Room that we heard from Anne, also to the last couple of questions, because it is really critical to understand that the shifts, the global shifts in the world, make the discussions that we are having here relevant, not just to the countries on the African continent, but to countries around the world. The shifts in global power, the shifts in the tools and mechanisms that are used to address a variety of factors are significant. You know, many of you may remember this meme during COVID about how COVID is everywhere, and there are countries led by women who are seemingly doing a better job than those who are not led by women. In fact, there was an opposing meme. This is the one I'm referring to, right? So there was a point in time where the question was about how much better cities and nations led by women were doing in response to the crisis. Clearly, this is not a simple issue. As Cheryl reminds us, there are complex answers to these, but I think our question should really be about what is the end we seek, rather than what is, and then look at the structures. If the end we seek is peace as we define it as positive peace, communities in which resources are fairly distributed, where we have good relations with neighbors, where businesses thrive, where there is trust in governments and institutions, then what kinds of mechanisms might impact us more positively than the single tool we seem to fall back on all the time, which is elections? What if we shift our thinking to seeing elections as merely a tool and not the end all and be all of power, authority, and decision-making? As we look at the next year of upcoming elections, there are elections in my country of origin, the country I have adopted, and many of the countries in which I work. And the factors, and these include Slovenia, the Philippines, Lebanon, Colombia, Papua New Guinea, India in March, Brazil, and Thailand. I think it's really important for us to keep in mind the rise of authoritarianism, of people in democracies willing to give in to authoritarian rule in the face of fear and insecurity. That is a global factor. It doesn't just affect countries that we are currently discussing. And I'm hoping that our conversations will take us to the global stage next, where we begin to look at what is happening. Macron's election this past week, in some ways, was a good demonstration of the pushback against populism and the extreme right. Hungary is impacted by that. Poland has an administration that is also a right-wing administration. And so do the Philippines, so does Brazil. So there are, and India, the rise of religious extremism in India and in a secular country, that it is now a religious nation, are all factors that are contributing, I think, to why we need to reconsider our decision-making processes. At the same time, I will say, because I don't ever want to end on a doom and gloom note, what is also true is that the last 20 years of research and conflict transformation practices, local and international peace practices, have developed amazing technologies. Technologies like citizen assemblies, technologies like dialogues of various kinds, consensus building processes. And I am referring to processes that originate in indigenous populations around the world, as well as Western practices. There is a combination of decision-making practices, for example, citizen assemblies. Ireland, despite what their elected officials wanted to do, held a citizen assembly and passed legislation permitting gay marriage. Those are nuanced decision-making processes that allow us to bypass some of the existing structures that I would encourage us all to be thinking about in order to have the kind of impact we need to. The rise in militaristic language is really scary, and the opposite of an inclusive society in which resources are distributed, if that is our goal, I think we have no alternative but to continue the conversations at a global stage. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Pratbha, for pulling all of this together. Thank you for getting us into the mood for the global conversation. You know, we are really looking forward to also interrogating these approaches, you know, in other parts of the world, Europe, America, like you have mentioned. So I would like to invite, as we begin to close, our presenters, Queenette, Pauline, and Anne, to respond to some of those questions, and just in 1 minute. I see Elizabeth's hand up again, and I want to allow her to ask a question, but okay, now she's unmuted. Elizabeth, please ask your question. We can't hear you. Okay, I guess there must be something wrong with her mic, because I see it open, but she's not able to, I can't hear the sound. So I will start with Pauline, with Queenette, and then Pauline and Anne. You have one minute, we need to round up. Thank you so much. Pauline?
Okay. I thought you said you start.
Okay, Queenette, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Helen. This has been very interesting conversations and very rich insights and perspectives. And of course, if we start talking about this issue, we'll not leave here today. But I want to quickly go to the question that you had posed for me earlier, Liberia, saying that the 30% affirmative action has not yet been passed, and what can be done to have this. And I would like to say that this is not only a case for Liberia. In most parts of West Africa, even in Ghana, in Nigeria, has not been passed. And there's been a whole lot of controversies surrounding this affirmative action. But also, this is a case where women need to really tighten up their grip on this. They need to bond together. Liberia is one of those countries that we showcase about how women coming together had been able to bring about change. The women mass movement for peace originated in Liberia, and it was women that brought about change in Liberia. It was also Liberia that gave us our first president in West Africa. So I want to say that this is a place where we really need advocacy. You see, some of the best practices of how we have been pushing for this implementation of the 30% affirmative action is the fact that most of the presidents, like in Ghana, for instance, the president had promised in his electoral campaign manifesto that was one of the things he was going to tackle. But of course, when he took office, he didn't do it. So women need to hold them accountable. We need to interrogate, not only when people make campaign and election manifestos, those election manifestos need to be interrogated when they're in power. And women need to also use it as their bargaining chip. You said you are going to do this, you didn't do, now you are coming back or another person is going. What are you? You have to put it in black and white how we are going to be able to deliver on these campaign promises and democratic dividends. I think advocacy is it, and also working together with the women parliamentarians. And of course, another thing, they say there is always a might in strength in might when people come together. Women need to come together. We need to forget about the fact that everybody wants to take the shine. We are all working for one purpose and one purpose only, to increase women's participation in leadership. Who the woman is, but it is the women agency. And that is what we need to, at all the time, promote. I also want to talk about the fact that of one question that was said about women not supporting their own. You know, each time this comes up, I tend to see it as some of those propaganda that is being, you know, perpetrated by the men folk, I'm sorry to say, because we know that there are men who don't support men candidates also. So it is politics. Politics is a game of corruption. It is a game of, you know, man bite man. It is a game of all manners of things happen in politics. But having said that, I also want to say that this is where we need to, you know, work on women's psyche, because it is the socialization process that has made them to know, they have been telling them all along that they are subordinates, that they are second-class citizens. So they feel that it is the men who are first-class citizens that they must push. And don't forget that sometimes also, even if a woman has her own opinion, her husband will tell her who to vote for. And in order for her to save her marriage, she has to toe the line. So let us not let us continue to advocate for women to be their own individuals, to be able to know that for us to move forward, we need all the women to work together. We don't need women to work in silos. We need the women agency. Thank you. I see the Helen, you are laughing.
Thank you so much.
I can go on and on.
I know you can go on and on, and our time is going. Thank you, Phoenix. Thank you so much. And so, Pauline, can you respond to the other question? If you can do that in a minute, please.
Yes, Queen has actually provided a perfect segue for me. And just to say that what Cheryl said earlier about transforming political parties to actually be spaces that are really inclusive for women, I think that's a space that once transformed can be key for mentorship, political mentorship of women and young women, considering that political parties have women's wings and youth wings, and these spaces can be used to build and develop the capacities of women to actually deliver on their mandates. For example, building their communication skills. It's been said that women go to parliament and keep quiet. They have been called lazy and idle, and yet it's, in most cases, it's because they actually don't know how to speak. So instead of them participating in these political parties as curtain raisers or morale boosters, political parties can actually make these efforts to introduce feminist leadership. This is leadership that's not entrenched in patriarchal or colonial attitudes, but it's actually about sharing power. And once this is done, women can actually see one another as allies and not enemies. And in way of conclusion, I'll end with a quote by Ala Salah. She says that I did not grow up around politics, but in an ordinary middle-class family. My mother is a designer and my father owns a construction company. But if we're not represented at the table, and if we don't have a meaningful voice in parliament, our rights will not be guaranteed, and discriminatory and restrictive laws will remain unchanged, continuing the cycle of instability and violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And I like what you ended with. If we don't do something, we are going to continue with this cycle of violence and instability in our countries, on the continent, and globally. Anne, can you just take 1 minute again to respond to the question about, do we need political parties? I saw you here, I saw you saying about, I heard you talk something about engaging political parties and the other stakeholders. And can women not think of other forms of organizing? I've heard some of the organizing from Pradba, from Queenet, you know, but what do you really think? 1 minute, please.
Okay, I think we need political parties. We will always need political parties to be able to represent the diversity of views that are out there, which is what political parties should be really doing. The challenge that we have in Africa is that that is not what our political parties are doing. And so the role that I see for women is to get into these political parties and use everything that they have within their means to try and restructure political parties, and using what Prabha said, start with the end in mind and say, what is it that we're looking for? And then organize these political parties, their structures and their process to meet those, or to address that end that we're looking for. I think we'll always need them, but women can help to improve the quality of the political parties that we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent response there. We will continue to interrogate this conversation as we go along. There have been some interesting comments and questions in the chat. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to take them now because we are running out of time. So we are going to type them out and share them with you. We're also going to be sharing the recordings for this webinar so that many of you can also read it. Queenet, someone is requesting for a research on the fact that women don't support women. I'm wondering if that's something that WANEP and the Peace Center can do, because this has become some kind of strategy. It's become a strategy by these patriarchs to try to play down, the work that we have been doing over the years. So let's talk more after this. Thank you everyone that has spoken. I would now like to invite Gertrude, who is our board member representing West Africa and the Director of Operations for the African Women's Development Fund, to give us a closing remark. Gertrude.
Thank you so much, Helen. Wow. We all just need to acknowledge that this has been just awesome. Helen, for an amazing facilitation and engaging conversation, from Cheryl to Sharon, to Pauline, to Anne and Praha. It has really been, not forgetting Queenet, it has really been insightful. I think this is a conversation that we all care deeply about because we have seen how elections in Africa have evolved over the years. I mean, talking personally from Ghana from 1992 to date, every 4 years, we look forward to the elections, but at the same time, we are also very conscious about the tensions and the potential violence that you can never tell, which should not be the case. I think we are all living here with the question of what is it that we are striving to achieve when it comes to governance, because elections, as we have heard, they are just events. What we need is transformation. Look at our youthful population and the unemployment and all that we are dealing with. A lot of this is linked to leadership, who we lead and who we elect to lead, and how we kind of ensure accountability. So this is a big conversation. I mean, the future of Africa really depends on how we kind of manage this process. And we also know all the tensions around, how elections are financed. And the corruption that underlies that, So for me, I think that this has really been an engaging conversation. A lot of insights have come about. We know the success story around the Women's Situation Room, knowing very well that in the course of elections, it's about how quickly conflicts are handled and all that to ensure that they don't escalate into something else. So there are some good practices that have been shared that we can take forward, but definitely this is a conversation that we need to continue engaging with. I'm looking forward to the Feminist Political Party. Why can't women form their own political party? We have the numbers, 52% of the population. Maybe that is what we need to challenge the patriarchal political party system we have now. So there are so many things that we can think about in terms of how we take this conversation forward. But I'm really looking forward to the next one. And thank you all for making the time. I'm hoping that the recording or excerpts of it can also be shared for those who are not able to join us, because there's so much that has been shared today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that closing. Thank you everyone who has joined us. We are really honored for you to have stayed to the end. Thank you for being so active. It's just been so vibrant. I've been reading the chat and it's as if we shouldn't stop this conversation. But let me tell you something. We are going to have another webinar, that is going to take this to the global level. So we are going to take all these experiences from Africa and then we compare it with others. Many times we think we're not doing well. Let's see what happens when we get to other parts of the world in terms of women's participation. So thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and we look forward to engaging with you more next time. Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phoenix. Bye.
You. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank
bye.
you, everyone. It was wonderful. Bye.